and welcome to Friday Night Spotlight, brought to you by Jones Ford Buick GMC, your hometown dealer for more than 50 years. I'm Maria Vasquez, and normally I would be joined by Ryan Wright, but this week I have a special guest, Joey Chenoweth, and he will be filling in. So let's get started with our game of the week, which is Santa Cruz traveling to Sequoia Pathway. Now, Joey, you've covered Sequoia Pathway. What can we expect from them in this game?
Well, see, I covered a 55-0 game. So that they appeared unstoppable at that time. Since then, they had a very close encounter, and then they got beat by Veritas Prep pretty badly this past week. So it's tough to say, but I'm not very smart as you might attest. But I think I figured this team out. So they have an amazing assortment of weapons. They have Xavier Gamble, Isaiah Stewart, UPL Jones. And if the team isn't able to get pressure on the quarterback, Alex Montano, he's able to get the ball and just have his pick. You know, do you throw it to the big guy, Yuffie, or do you throw it to the fast guy, Jairi, and Isaiah Stewart in the backfield? But if you get that pressure on the quarterback, they really have a tough time getting any of those reps the ball. And what we saw from Santa Cruz against a 4A team in Casa Grande Union this past weekend lets me to believe that they're not going to have any problem getting pressure on the quarterback and stopping the running.
Yes, the Santa Cruz defense has been very impressive this year. Just to highlight some of the younger guys like Robert Maldonado and Davin Ethington. You know, Maldonado has 4 sacks, and as a team, the Dust Devils have 12 sacks. And then you also have Dylan Hukel, who missed last season with a nagging injury from a previous sport, and so far he has 2 interceptions. So the Dust Devil defense is really holding its ground. Joey, any final thoughts on the game?
Well, so far, Santa Cruz has shut down Coolidge's Greg Rodriguez, and they've shut down R.J. Keaton from Casa Grande Union, and these are 2 of the best running backs in the state, definitely 2 of the best in the county. And so, if they're able to do that against Pathway as well, it's hard to see how Pathway has enough offense to overcome what's going to be another big game for probably for Hunter Ogle.
All right, and that does it for our breakdown of this week's game of the week. Tune in for all your coverage. And now we are transitioning into the picks portion of our show, and we're going to start off with our game of the week. Now, this is week 5, and Santa Cruz is traveling to the Sequoia Pathway, and I will be covering this game, so I do not get a pick.
Well, hopefully, for the sake of our Pinal County teams, we have a better week this week than we did last week. Only 3 Pinal County teams won last week, and 2 of those were because they were playing another Pinal County team. So only Coolidge won against a non-Pinal County team. So we're hoping for some better results this week. But we will get a guaranteed one for that one, and I just think Santa Cruz Valley Union is just going to be too much on both offense and defense for Sequoia Pathway. And then we move on to Maricopa. We move all the way from 2A to 5A. They're going to be visiting Notre Dame Prep. Now, Notre Dame is typically a pretty formidable team. They're having a little bit of a struggle this year at 2-2, after 2 consecutive losses to Mountain Ridge and Campo Verde. If Maricopa has any hopes of snapping their own 3-game losing streak, it's going to be by winning the turnover battle. Now, the Notre Dame quarterback had 5 interceptions last week. So they're going to really need to get into his vision and start getting some easy scores off turnovers if they're going to have a chance. But I think it will still be Notre Dame prevailing here.
Yeah, Maricopa really struggled last week. The previous week they were without their starting quarterback and their starting running back, but last week they got them back and they still struggled. So it's a little hard to tell which Maricopa team is going to show up, and I'm going to have to go with Notre Dame Prep also. Our next game is CG Union hosting Buena, and CG Union has looked really impressive over the past couple of weeks, but they're going up against another 5A team this week. They went up against South Point Catholic to start the season, and Buena has 3 guys rushing for over 100 yards. Last week, the CG Union defense, they looked really gassed in the second half against 2A Santa Cruz, so I'm taking Buena.
Yeah, Braden's had a nice season. They did get blown out by South Point, but lots of teams get blown out by South Point. Their quarterback Austin Grimm is efficient, but the strength is with the rushing game. They had 350 yards rushing against Paradise Valley last week, so this will be a very tough challenge for Casa Grande Union. But and one other thing to consider is they have one less day of rest because they played on Saturday instead of Friday, and so I think Brena edges them out here. So the next game is Poston Butte at Tempe. Now, Tempe has so far lost games by 30, 40, 42, and 12. They've only had 33 points in 4 games. So I think this will be an easy win for Poston. The more interesting question is whether or not they want to move up to the Open Division or stay in 4A where they have a chance of winning a state championship. The rankings will come out after this game, so that's a more interesting thing. But they should have no problem with Tempe.
I agree with Joey. I mean, there's no reason to pick against Poston right now. I mean, they have a phenomenal running back in Zion Burns. Their defense has been spectacular, and then we have to highlight two of the really young guys, 2 sophomores. You have tight end Connor Lopez, who already has 149 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns, and then you also have on defense you have Bobby Gaitan, who's pretty much leading the team with 3 sacks for 60 yards. I got to go with the Broncos. Our next game is Apache Junction traveling to Arcadia. Now, this is going to be a very emotional game, I believe, because the head coach for Arcadia is the former head coach for Apache Junction. And, there's going to be a lot of familiarity between these two, between Coach Vance Miller and the Prospectors. But I think, the Prospectors, their quarterback, Gavin Lamangelo, he's been spot on for a sophomore, and he's going to be the difference maker in this game.
Yeah, both Arcadia and AJ have both felt the wrath of Poston Butte lately. But AJ has been putting together a respectable season. The best when they're balanced. Against the straight up Foothills, they had 255 passing yards and 291 rushing yards. If they can keep that going, they should be able to get revenge on a coach who left them behind and beat Arcadia. So the next game is Vista Grande at Washington. They're going to Phoenix for this one. Vista thought they were going to have an easy schedule this year. A lot of their opponents have overperformed what would have been expectations. Washington is one of those. They don't keep a lot of stats, but they're 3-1 this season. And all it comes down to, can Vista Grande just hold on to the ball? They had 4 more turnovers on Friday. They have 16 on the season, 10 in the last 2 games. You can't win that way. So if they keep playing like that, then it's gonna be Washington. And until I see them keep control of the ball, I'm gonna pick their opponent. So I'm picking Washington.
Again, I have to agree with Joey. Turnovers have really been costly for Vista Grande, and Phoenix Washington. They're not gonna overpower you, but if they can play a cleaner game than the Spartans, hey, you got to go with Phoenix Washington. Our next game is Coolidge hosting Safford, and so we always talk about some of our quarterbacks here, Gavin Lamangelo, Angel Flores, but Coolidge's quarterback in Jacob Gunter, he has been spectacular in his first season as a varsity starter. So far, he has 916 passing yards, a 70% completion rate, 12 touchdowns, and no interceptions. When Coolidge has struggled, Gunter has been their bright spot, and he's been consistent. So I'm taking the Bears.
I can't pick this game because I'll be covering it, but that's a nice matchup. So Coolidge hasn't played Safford in a while. Should be an interesting test. The next game, speaking of Safford, is their neighbors, Thatcher, who will be hosting Florence. Thatcher's on a 3-game losing streak. They've had a tough time since moving up from 2A, where they were year after year a powerhouse. They've had a tough time this year, but they've had a tough schedule too. They've lost against Snowflake, Purse Ridge, and ALA Gilbert North, 3 of the best teams in 3A. But Thatcher just got off this Gilbert North game where they gave up 376 yards to Jack Reisdorf. So if Florence is going to have a chance here in a season where they're also struggling, Christopher Walter is going to have to step up. He's had a 58% completion rate. He's had 7 touchdowns and 1 interception, so he's been playing well. But he's going to have a really good game against Thatcher, especially in Thatcher. I just don't think it's going to be enough, so I think Thatcher's going to win this game.
And I am actually going to go with the Gophers. I think their rushing game is really going to be the determining factor here. You have Devontae Neal and Josh McAvoy, both of them rushing over 300 yards, and they combined for 9 touchdowns. I think this is going to be Florence's game to get things turned around. Our next game is ALA Ironwood hosting Eastmark, and both of these teams have really struggled. ALA Ironwood is still winless, and, I don't see that changing. Last week was one of their best games against Gilbert Christian. They scored 20 points. Justin Martos was, the highlight for the Warriors, and, while I think this is a kind of a progression for them, I think I have to go with Eastmark on this one.
Yeah, I've covered both of these teams the past 2 weeks. They both played against Coolidge. Coolidge has wound up winning easily against both of them, but Eastmark was definitely able to make it an uglier game, to make it kind of bring Coolidge down into the trenches a bit. They actually took the lead on an improbable first drive. They weren't able to get much offense going after that, but they kept Coolidge at bay for at least the first half. Meanwhile, ALA Ironwood wasn't able to come close to scoring really against Coolidge, so I'm going to go with Eastmark as well. It brings us to our final two games. Both these games feature Pinal County teams that are coming back from quarantine after their schools were shut down due to COVID. So it's going to be interesting to see how each team responds to all that time off, where they weren't even allowed to practice. They just had to stay home for 2 weeks. The first game on Friday night is Santan Foothills, who is not being welcomed back from quarantine very nicely. They're playing Push Ridge, which has been having a great season so far. They beat both Thatcher and Stafford by double digits. They employ 2 quarterbacks in each game and 3 running backs who all are productive, and so they have a lot of weapons to throw at Foothills. Foothills was struggling before quarantine, and I think they'll continue to struggle, and Push Ridge should win this one pretty easily.
Again, Joey is hitting everything, right on the spot. Santan Foothills are coming off of quarantine. They might be a little rusty, not having practiced over 2 weeks. Whereas he mentioned Push Ridge, they just have so many different options. So I have to agree with him and go with Push Ridge. And our last game is going to be a Saturday game where Combs is hosting Thunderbird. Now, again, the Coyotes coming off a 2-week quarantine, they're going to have even less time to practice than Foothills does, and they're hosting Thunderbird, who has Jeffrey B. Lilly, who has 667 total yards of offense, 500 of those are passing, and then you also have running back Jordan Lohusky, who has over 300 rushing yards. It's going to be a tough welcome for the Coyotes.
Yeah, Poston also beat the Thunderbird. We should have had the Poston beat writer on here instead. Jeffrey Lilly, he's been a dual threat all year, so that's going to be something Combs is going to have to look out for. But I think Combs is going to be so energized to play football. They were really down after they had to go into quarantine. I think they'll be able to take care of Thunderbird.
And that does it for our picks. Be sure to visit Pinal Central for all your local coverage on Pinal County sports and enjoy the games. We will see you next week.